How's it going, everyone? I'm Patrick Steese. Today, I'm super excited for the opportunity to speak with an entrepreneur, innovator, and thought leader in the healthcare app development space, Sidharth Ramesh. Before we get into that, if you enjoy this video today, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. With that, let me introduce Sidharth. How's it going?
Hey Patrick, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. All right, let's hop right in. I wanna talk about you first. You're a very fascinating person. Please just tell us about your background, how you got into healthcare tech, and anything else that you might want to share.
Sure. So I started my MBBS. This is what doctors need to study in India to then practice medicine. And both my parents were actually doctors. So in India, it's more of the default route that you have to go through. And I started my college and then did medical school. Noticed that I've always been interested in computers. So even in medical school, I tended to work on research projects that were more on the computer side of things. So we worked on, detecting diabetic retinopathy. So there was this Kaggle contest out there. So was already deep into data science, knew how to program from back in school, and yeah, right after my med school got over, I just couldn't wait to actually do what I've always wanted to do, which is like innovate in the health IT space and actually build new things that can affect a lot of patients all at once instead of the usual healthcare paradigm where you treat one patient at a time. Uh, I've always related more to just like sitting in my computer writing code and then that affecting a lot of patients all at once.
I love that. So you're the founder of a company called Medblocks. So what inspired that to become a thing?
So it's actually funny because Medblocks, I started off as a blockchain company to store healthcare data on the blockchain. And we just named it like Medblocks because blockchain. And, this was the time when people would throw money at anything that had blockchain on it. So we just basically we tried to just put healthcare data on the blockchain, and a Swiss company offered to buy us out at $1 million, and we just like were like, wait, what's going on here? This is not real, and this can't be real. And we were actually facing real challenges then. We are working with multiple real hospitals, and we actually face this issue of one, then data being present in like completely different formats across these different hospitals, and two, the data not even being present to begin with. So it was just all handwritten notes, and there was really nothing that you could even use, right? So that's technically how the name Medblocks started off, but we've since then pivoted into this problem of healthcare data itself. And that initial problem that I faced when doing this, the blockchain thing, is still true today. Like the data in different hospitals are completely different. It's hard to really build anything on top of it because of this incoherence.
That's really interesting that you started in blockchain. I'm kind of curious, did you have your own token or which chain did you work on or how did that go? That seems like a really interesting application for healthcare.
Yeah, so we didn't release our own token, although that would have, in retrospect, made us a lot of money. But what we instead did was we used open source blockchain technologies out there, like BigChain DB and the Hyper Ledger of the Linux Foundation, and we tried to create a private blockchain in which insurance providers can automatically pay other hospitals based on certain attributes in healthcare data. So we try to kind of automate this insurance side of things, but then again, like realize that hey, the data is not there. What are you gonna do without So quickly came to the realization, but I mean that didn't stop people from throwing money. So
That's awesome. So in this new iteration of Medblocks, you're focusing on healthcare app development.
yeah, so what I want, at least like it's not there. I wouldn't say it's completely there right now, but the direction in which we are going is it would be nice to have a common layer, a common standardized API layer on top of which, if I were to, go and build, it's just like easy to plug and play my own application, right? Like moving back the time I started off, and it wasn't just blockchain. I was also working on other things. We were working on this, detecting diabetic retinopathy using the fundal images and getting that data, getting access to that data. Each hospital had its own different variant of it. So it's kind of like it was easy for some of our colleagues who are working with X-rays and DICOM because DICOM was already there. But this fundus image was kind of like this in the middle thing where it's not yet fully standardized. There is not real push towards standardization. And each hospital just decides to adopt its own way to like store it, right? Like some people just store it on an FTP server, others stored it on like an S3 bucket. So we saw like huge variation. And to me, I would like a future version of myself if they are innovating in the healthcare space and they want to just build on top of the data that's already available. They should just be able to like go to a hospital, like read well-written documentation and just like build their application, plug and play, and it just works, right? Like they're adding value to the healthcare ecosystem rather than like wrangling with these different protocols and different formats.
I'm curious because this sounds really fascinating. Honestly, I go to the doctor here in the US, and whenever I want to get my health records, for example, they send me a fax. And it's like, how are we living in a digital age where information is so immediately available and I'm still receiving paper copies of things that should be able to, just show up on my phone? So I'm kind of curious, when you look at this on the global scale, how do you think that something like that would work? Do you think that it would be able to work across borders of countries, or is it just inside of health systems, or what's your vision for that?
So I see this as an international problem because healthcare data and the healthcare data models that you're using to describe things are global, right? Like people report diagnosis almost the same across the world. People, document signs and symptoms almost the same. But it's because of certain, the reason why some countries have adopted digitization in the healthcare space is because of insurance and because of reimbursement. So the US being like one very stark example here. So I feel like if digitization is driven by insurance, what ends up happening is that it's you start thinking in procedure codes. You start thinking in, okay, which code should I put in for me to get my claims, right? So I even have this running joke between my friends. So we've all like studied in India, but then they've all like gone abroad. So some people study in the UK, and some people are practicing in the US. So in the UK, I think the joke goes along the lines of, okay, what is the protocol? Like, what is the NHS protocol? And we'll go along according to protocol. In India, it's like, how much money do you have, right? And in the US, before you even start a diagnosis, it's how much, what insurance do you have? Like, if you're basically like treating them based on the insurance that they have, and it's not even a joke because it's like really true in some sense. But yeah, I mean that brings us back to the question, like data and this need for interoperable applications. I think it's a global thing, right? Like because an innovation that's happening in the US, for example, an application that can deliver better diagnosis, or it can deliver better outcomes for a very particular niche condition, let's say diabetic retinopathy, that acts on the same data, whether it's in the US or whether it's some remote part of Kenya, right? And the technology that we are working with is the same, and the hardware is the same. And why can't we just have this data layer which enables all of these applications and just works the same across? So that's my dream.
Yeah, I love it. Honestly, it sounds like a great dream, and I'm both like frustrated and optimistic at the same time. I'm frustrated because I feel like, back to your joke that's not a joke about the insurance, that's exactly how the point of care experience is here is they start with who's your insurance, how are we going to get paid? And then secondary is okay, now what's wrong? And
Yeah.
I feel like that maybe needs to shift in a different direction. So I am kind of curious your perspective on kind of keeping on the theme of global. What do you think the biggest opportunity is in the global markets for either this data or the way that we change the way that we think about healthcare? Like what do you think if you had a magic wand that you could wave and change something, what do you think it would be?
I think I came very close to looking at this future when I first saw the implementation of Smart on Fire. So this was my first aha moment, which was I saw these apps on the Smart on Fire app gallery, and this is like open. Anyone can just go and just Google Smart on Fire app gallery, and I saw this app for growth charting, right? And it just like launches in within a particular context of a patient, and then it just like charted the growth chart very neatly. And it had so many nice features on it, like the height of your parents and your average height, so on. Then I just like closed that and like opened another app for bilirubin charting, and it was able to pick a very specific child, like an infant, and then based on the age of the infant, it was able to like uh, chart which level of whether the bilirubin levels are normal or not. So these are all things that when I was in college, we had to like memorize a lot of the normal levels, like what's the normal level for a baby aged this months to this months. And it gets really crazy at the weeks because the bilirubin level is such a sensitive thing that you don't want somebody remembering a formula for this and me just looking at the fact that okay, somebody has made an app for this and it can work on top of any compliant uh, data platform that exposes the FHIR API. That was my aha moment. Like I immediately saw that and I was like, okay, this is possible. It's happening, and you have apps out there which are actually useful, right? So that was my first moment. And I got into that. I like that fascinated me a lot. I went much deeper into like, okay, let's try to understand what this is. Let's try to understand what FHIR is all about. So, in my opinion, the magic wand, what I would want is if somehow everybody can represent the same data points in the same way. So, for example, the bilirubin value for the baby, right? You can't have an app that charts the bilirubin value and shows the normal levels and the abnormal levels without everybody in the world agreeing to chart or agreeing to represent the bilirubin value the same way. So that is it. That's my like magic wand thing. Like everybody somehow needs to represent these concepts the same.
Yeah, I feel like in some ways it's two sides of the same coin. You have to have the data and be able to represent it in certain ways, and who cares about the data if you don't have any way to pull it and do something meaningful with it? So having a whole catalog of apps for Smart on Fire is a good start, but how are we going to adopt that at scale as the industry moves forward and these data standards become more prevalent? So I do want to talk a little bit more about data standards because you kind of hit on it with FHIR and Smart on Fire. Do you feel like FHIR is a panacea or a cure-all for all of these data challenges, or is there something else out there that's gaining more traction, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is it's a good segue into what I actually found out when I started to look more into FHIR and started to go deeper and deeper into the standard. And we actually tried to build an EHR from scratch just on FHIR. Right? Like we try to do this, and it's possible, right? Like it's not that it's impossible to do. It's possible to do, but then you realize that the goal initially was that two people represent the same data the same way, right? And I don't think FHIR is a cure-all in this particular scenario. And the main reason is because it's driven by profiles and it's driven by implementation guides. So FHIR as a standard kind of takes this approach of, okay, I'm going to give you a set of fundamentals, and I'm going to give you a set of tools that you can use to build your own standard on top of, and it's up to you what you build. Like, it could be the international patient summary, it could be the US core profile, it could be the Australian core data set for interoperability, it could be India's ABDM, or Saudi Arabia's Nafis. All of these are built on top of FHIR, right? And when I say that they both don't represent bilirubin the same way, it's kind of like it doesn't meet that initial goal, right? Which is, we want to represent the same data the same way across all institutions and infrastructures. And that, to me, is the problem with FHIR. And when I started looking at this a little bit more, I noticed that there was another standard called openEHR or openEHR that was gaining a lot more popularity, especially because of this problem with FHIR. And the main thing that FHIR kind of does wrong is that it gives this base level of, okay, these are the base resources. You take them and add what you want to them. openEHR took the opposite approach. It instead said, okay, here are maximal data points. And they have like thousands of these things called archetypes, which are like clinical concepts. So if you have bilirubin value, there is an archetype for that. And that you take in your own setting, and then you cut out the things that you don't need, as opposed to adding the things that you need, which FHIR does. So openEHR's clinical modeling approach and like how they do this thing is much more, in my opinion, superior to the way FHIR does it with the base definition and then profiling. But that being said, it's also, we need to look at reality as it is today. And, we even had this webinar with Graham the other day where he talked about, okay, FHIR is good at a few things. Like, it's easy for developers to get started. And if you have something like a black box implementation, like for example, Epic or Cerner or all these big EHRs, it's easier for them to implement a FHIR API on top of it than build everything out from scratch, like what you would need for openEHR. So it's kind of like, I think there is a better standard for proper interoperability and to get this vision across. And I think that's openEHR. But with the momentum at which FHIR has been growing and other people are looking at FHIR and building on top of FHIR, I think it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, it may account for the deficiencies with just the amount of force that it has behind the community and the push for FHIR by governments.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually what I was about to ask you too, is do you feel like openEHR and FHIR are competitors, or are they more complementary? Like, what are the opportunities there for openEHR to help or supplement?
So the common answer that you would usually hear for this is that, okay, openEHR is for storage and it's for primary capture of the clinical information, and FHIR is for transfer of information from one system to another. And I partly agree with this, but then I also think that you could do better. You could do a lot better, because when you are taking information in high definition, right? So openEHR, like, it represents all information that you need for a clinical setting. So it's kind of like taking your core database, and then you have all this data here. Now, when you send it out as FHIR, what you can send out is limited by what everybody else agrees on, which happens to be the implementation guide or the FHIR profile. So when you send it out, by nature, what you do is you send a lossy version of what you have internally. Now, there is avenues for sending this high definition data out, but then maybe it is also just a people problem. Like, multiple people need to agree on what they will all interoperate on. So maybe it's just the fact that people can't really agree on something, that we have these lossy FHIR profiles in the middle. But I also see a future where you can completely remove these, and then transfer this high definition data. And the person on the other side just operates on the data that they need, but they still have a copy of the high definition data if they want. And this is still being explored. It's not, it's not really production ready or implemented anywhere. I mean, we are working on an implementation in Catalonia as we speak to make this a reality. But yeah, it's not been proven at a huge scale as of this recording. But that may change in another few months if we have a full implementation of this in Catalonia. That will change.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the journey, the hero's journey, if you will, for any standard, really, not even just healthcare data standards. We saw that in the security space with the evolution of authentication from like on-premises domain-bound authentication to some earlier web ones like basic authentication to the eventual adoption of cross-domain authentication such as OAuth and the OpenID layers. And I would imagine that as time goes on, we could and should expect these conversations to evolve and things like openEHR to become a lot more mainstream. So I mean, I'm really excited to see where this goes personally. I'm a huge fan of FHIR because it's better than the absence of FHIR in a lot of ways. Which to me, that at my core is okay, fax machines and maybe some of these more transactional based data structures like we've seen in some of the earlier iterations of healthcare data standardization. But I think it's really cool concept, and definitely appreciate those insights.
Absolutely. I agree with that for sure. It's kind of like, the dose response curve when you start taking some medication, it's like the first 5 milligrams of something just like increases your effectiveness like crazy. Then every extra increment just like adds a little bit more. So maybe it's kind of like that. Like FHIR is that initial like just hyperbolic addition, and then everything else after that is just like, okay, it's a little better, it's a little better, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the magic of having a community that's so passionate around helping people and solving these types of problems is those problems will hopefully be what drives the standard to an eventual adoption to maybe get to that magic wand dream that you have that, I'm on board. It sounds great. I think just doing anything at scale and getting people would. I have this thing that I've was taught many years ago is that legacy is not always just like a technology or a standard. In a lot of ways, it's a mindset. And I
Mm.
think that getting people to the point where they can think that way and start wanting to do these things, not because they have to, but because they truly believe about it, will probably be what starts to push us over that next step.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a lot about, the economics of one huge EHR versus one small, cheap, headless EHR with multiple apps. Right? Like I like to think of this illustration where a lot of fish are eating like a shark. It's just a graphic that I saw somewhere, but it's almost like if you want to beat the big name EHRs, most of them don't do everything well. Like they don't do the niche things really well. And this is where these other apps can step in. And I feel like if there is a first class platform for these apps, and these apps can operate as like proper components instead of like being treated given this step sibling treatment, then I think you get something that's truly amazing and something that may even outrival while making it cheaper these big name EHRs.
Yeah, that really resonates with me too. My wife is a physician and her parents are both physicians, and when we all get in a room, they love to tell me about a particular large EHR that they all use across different health systems that just always falls a little bit short of the thing that they actually need to do or want to do to improve the lives of their patients. So, I mean, I feel like if the concept of headless EHR and building apps and those types of things really, I think for me, I definitely can relate to it only because I hear and I feel and I empathize with not just like the doctor's experiences, but what the change could mean for patients. And I think maybe one of the biggest drivers of that type of thing that I've seen in this century is AI. And I want to talk about AI just a little bit because I think AI has a very large potential. You can't be in a conversation in 2024 and AI not come up. So I'm just going to toss it over to you and say, let's talk about AI. And I'm curious how you see that fitting into the vision that you have and what potential you see for it in the future.
Absolutely. So I've been trying to grapple with this question as well, which is, will AI make any sort of structured data obsolete? And the more that I've been thinking about this, if you present a piece of text, so what AI today, especially these generative models and these large language models, what they are really good at is comprehending unstructured information, and they can comprehend natural language very well, right? So what it boils down to is, can two AI models, or can an AI model unambiguously always look at an unstructured piece of text? So let it be some writing, some maybe just like some note, or maybe a PDF, or maybe something handwritten. And can it unambiguously convert it to what we want, which is like this unambiguous definition of bilirubin, right? Like we want everybody to represent this exactly the same way. Can AI do that? Well, the answer is, if you don't have a target to which AI should translate this to, it's really hard to make it do, because it's hard for two people to also agree on whether, what counts as a diagnosis, for example. So I just had this question very recently in a talk that I gave. So there is one patient who has a history of a dog bite. He's been bitten by a dog. He now has excessive salivation, and he seems to be scared of water. Okay, and on another patient, patient two, you have a note that says patient has rabies, like patient is diagnosed with rabies. Now, assuming that you give these two pieces of text to a human, like a human interpreter, and you ask the question, how many patients in this data set have rabies? And I just asked them this poll, and I got half the people saying one and half the people saying two, right? So it's not a problem with AI, because even if AI gets as good as a human being, this problem of ambiguity still exists, right? But that being said, what AI is really good at is like converting these unstructured pieces of these unstructured artifacts, let's say text or PDFs or lab reports, JSON, anything unstructured stuff. It's really good at converting this into structured stuff if that structure is provided explicitly, and you're able to exactly tell it like what the structure means and what you're expecting from it. So in essence, that's technically, in AI terms, it's part prompt engineering. But if you are talking to a human being, that's like literally telling them the definition of when do you consider something a diagnosis versus not. When do you just consider it a HOPI or a HPI? And when do you start considering it a diagnosis? So that is a very nuanced distinction, and I think AI is definitely going to help, but it's going to help in converting these unstructured data into structured artifacts that can then, we can compute on that more reliably and more efficiently. So it's not immediately just going to solve this problem of unambiguous identification of these data entities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And even as an earlier adopter of AI myself, trying to, I would say, like parse through things and understand and learn, like, okay, maybe this is something that's based on factual reality. Sometimes this is something that could be a hallucination based on, it has this data here, it has this data here. And I think using AI responsibly with, proper privacy and all of those things are certainly important, but also being smart enough, maybe not smart might not be the right word, but maybe being skilled enough to look at the outputs of AI and make a decision on, okay, is this good or is this bad, is also something that we're probably just going to have to, as a society, adopt as a skill set. I love the like data conversion use case. I use this quite frequently. Sometimes I'll just hop over to ChatGPT and say, give me a FHIR resource for this, and it spits it out, and I throw it into my FHIR server, and then like bada boom, it works. And that's awesome. And I love those generative cases. But I think for both clinical and research in the future, I'm really excited to see what the applications could be. And I have a feeling that we don't even know yet what it's going to look like. I think we've started to dream and we've thought about it, but I can only imagine that once this really becomes, integrated into our lives, and for healthcare especially, it's going to be a completely different conversation.
Absolutely. And I think like I like this thought experiment where I just start thinking of what if large language models had infinite context windows and they had infinite memory and they were accurate all the time, right? Like, and again, these are like all hypotheticals, but then it seems like the mean is tending towards that. So it's like, do you really need a database? Can you just ask an AI to remember everything for you and just like ask it questions? Just a thought experiment.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, it's funny that you bring that up because I have this one running prompt that I've had for multiple months now that it's built so much context that I would feel like I would just lose part of my, like lose a friend or something if I lost that because it knows exactly what I'm going for so well. I'm kind of curious too. Have you stumbled across or have you discovered any notable AI projects that you're really excited about, or things that you're like, oh wow, I didn't think about that, but this is totally makes sense and it's awesome and I want to use it like yesterday?
Yeah, sure. And this is again the projects. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody's using LangChain and all of the usual stuff in their staple, right? Like any one sort of some vector database in their pipeline. But one thing that I really it took me aback was this paper by Microsoft called MedPrompt. And so this was a paper that was talking about how non-domain specific models, so for example, Chat GPT-4 was outperforming things like Google's MedPalm. And again, I think this is MedPalm 2, so it was better than ChatGPT-4 just by itself. But what they did was, if given very smart prompting, and this was like prompting on a different level, like I'll tell you more about it, but they proved that something like GPT-4, which is a general purpose model, can outperform MedPalm 2, which was specially trained on medical data and medical data sets, on medical question and answering almost all the time using this technique called MedPrompt. And that, that was the moment like we were all like, hey guys, stop fine tuning all the models. Can you just read this paper first before you continue all your work? Like stop everything. This was it was, I think it's a key paper or a key innovation, because what that proves is that a generalizable model is just like a few years in the future will outperform any fine tuning that you do today. And if it can do that, then so many companies spending millions of dollars on training and fine tuning their own model. I don't know. Like, is it even worth it?
Wow, that's wild. Yeah, I'm really excited for how we as humans and companies find more ways to partner with AI in the future. And speaking of partnerships, Medblocks and Darena Solutions have a partnership. I know, kind of a silly
Yeah.
segue, but yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the partnership that Darena and Medblocks do have, and maybe we'll just start with like, how did this come about, and what is it, and what are some of the benefits that both your customers and our customers and both companies should see.
Yeah, I think Darena has a huge footprint in the US, right? And I think, Darena, you're almost responsible for more than 50% of active FHIR APIs in the US today. And to me, this alone is like, with Blue Button Pro and all of this work done on the ground level for people who did not know how to expose their data. This alone is like extremely impressive, right? Like nobody else has these many live FHIR APIs today in anywhere in the world probably. And Medblocks, I mean, we've always looked at the other side of things, like how can we build apps, how do we build these apps, how do we get these protocols up to spec so that we can then have these apps. But in the same vein, we've been helping other people build these applications, teaching people how to build these applications. And I just think it's almost like a front end back end partnership where we can easily help build these applications. And Darena has a huge number of FHIR APIs live today. And I know that you're also like working on MeldRx, which is like trying to expand this even more to use cases beyond a normal hospital, right? Like you want FHIR APIs to just be used for any sort of small application or small app. So I just think it's a natural kind of a combination where we've been building apps and we've been helped build these apps for some time now. And Darena has been on the other side building these APIs that can then receive these apps. So I think this partnership is definitely mutually beneficial.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier, two sides of the same coin. You gotta have the data to make the apps work. You gotta have the apps to make the data worth anything other than just having data sitting there. And I think that's where I'm really excited. I personally would love to see more apps. We've got this data now that's mandated in the US. Like you have to have the data available. So let's do something about it. Let's not just have it sit there. So I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Few more questions. Some of these are maybe a little lighter and a little bit more fun. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you watch? Like, what are the things that you're keeping up with? Some trends. They may or may not have to be related to FHIR, openEHR, some of those types of things. But what gets you the most excited about healthcare right now?
Good question. So I think we've been working a lot with US customers and European customers. And in fact, we've applied for a lot of these government tenders, and we even won one of the recent ones for the Swedish government. There's a university called Karolinska. But what excites me the most is that most of these places already have a system in place, and they have some sort of digital health infrastructure. So you are going there, you're like trying to fix these broken pipes, you're trying to do data migration, you're integrating data with like hundreds of other systems. Very expensive work, very like tedious work. But then I look at completely developing countries like India, Thailand, South Africa, and these places, everybody is still writing on paper, and they have been writing on paper for the past few years, like maybe a couple of decades. And when I look at that, and then when I see what do you really need to make them go from paper to adopt a digital infrastructure, it's not much. The resources that you need are very low, and you are able to get them up and running quickly with whatever you need. And if you get this stack right, they can start using a smart on fire app built in the US. And it's almost like, you know, a lot of people completely leapfrogged telephone lines. So you had, the governments like laying down the infrastructure for fiber optic cable, telephone lines, and all of this. And there are parts of the world where they do not have telephone lines, but they have 4G internet. They're able to directly just go to the smartphone directly. You never had the telephone line to begin with. So for me, that excites me a lot. The fact that there are, in fact, the majority of the population today, the majority of hospitals in the world today do not have a proper health IT setup. And to me, being able to go there and be that first affordable platform that they can adopt, and getting it right the first time, so that they can then utilize these extremely advanced apps flowing in from these other developed nations like the US or in Europe. That to me, I feel that that has more potential to save like millions of lives than probably any single intervention invented by anyone else.
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah, I had never even thought of that before that. Yeah, because we went through this progression of civilization with the phone lines, and they were above ground, they were underground, and then cell phones came out, and then these wider bands of data exchange, et cetera, came about, and yeah, that's just kind of available. And if they can adopt that, then why go through the progression? That's a really cool perspective, and I haven't thought about that. I do have a question for you as a founder who has, created a company and has grown it quite successfully. It's awesome to watch your successes and how many people are really jazzed up about Medblocks. But what advice would you give to new startups that are entering the healthcare tech space?
So I would ask them to be a little wary of this lean startup principle, which is, make the most minimum viable thing and then put it out there. So yes, it works for certain extremely high scale up products. So if you want to build a social media, then if you don't have users, you die, right? Like, so it makes sense to push out the MVP immediately. But what happens if you build half a bridge and then start letting cars go through? So that to me is building for healthcare, right? Like you got to think about a lot of things, and especially when I told you about needing a stack for uh, places where there was no health IT to begin with, you just can't build an MVP. You need everything. Like you need to take care of labs, you need to take care of like the X-ray machines, you need to take care of their billing, you need to send them notifications. So it's like if you are in the health IT space, it's gonna take you some time to really like look at your product and have this overall picture, right? And if you go to market too early with just like something really small or one small aspect of it, don't be discouraged by the fact that people don't immediately want it, because again, it's the analogy between like a social media network and a half-built bridge. You may not want to launch a half-built bridge. So that's at least like my 1 cent about how healthcare IT is slightly different. You need to look at a lot of things before you launch it.
I'm probably going to start using that in my daily life. I love that analogy, a half-built bridge. Well, Sidharth, I really appreciate your time today. These are amazing insights, and I definitely enjoyed the conversation and the thoughts and the vision of what the future could be. So my final question for you today is, where can all of our viewers and listeners find you?
Medblocks.com is a good place to, just visit our website. We have a YouTube channel too, youtube.com/@medblocks. I'm pretty active and post a lot of educational videos on health IT. You can follow me there as well. Yeah, and then there's my LinkedIn. But yeah,
Awesome.
website first, medblocks.com. This is the spelling, Medblocks.
Medblocks. All right, cool. Well, really appreciate your time again. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you around.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for the interview. It's very interesting.
You bet. Cheers.